The world is a machine, a sprawling, impossibly complex piece of software running on hardware we can't conceive of. Most people live their lives as intended users, never questioning the interface, never seeing the code. But my job is to find the cracks. As a quality assurance tester for video games, I'm a professional at seeing the seams. I find the bugs, the exploits, the places where the illusion of a perfect world breaks down. I thought I was just testing games. I was wrong. I was in training. And when reality itself started to glitch, I was the only one who could see what was crawling through from behind the screen. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The stench of stale coffee and ozone hung heavy in the air of my cubicle, a familiar perfume I'd come to associate with digital worlds breaking. On my screen, a paladin clad in impossibly shiny armor was sinking, very slowly, into a rock. His legs were gone, his torso half submerged in gray, checkered polygons. This was a clipping error, a classic. Log entry 734. I dictated into my headset, my voice a monotone drone. Acid collision failure. Player character model clips through static rock geometry in quadrant F7 of the Whispering Peaks. Allows user to see through the world map. Severity, critical. Replication steps. This was my life. 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, I was Alex, professional reality breaker. I didn't create worlds, I meticulously documented their failures. Texture pop-in, animation loops, non-player characters walking into walls, null pointers that crashed the entire server. I'd seen it all. I spoke the language of failure fluently. To me, every beautiful rendered sunset was just a collection of light maps and shaders waiting to corrupt. Every epic quest was a string of code that could easily get tangled, sending a dragon into an endless flapping T-pose. The magic was gone. All worlds were just code, and all code was flawed. It had made me cynical, detached. It was a worldview that paid the bills, but poisoned the soul. After logging the clipping issue, I spent another hour trying to force a physics-based glitch by stacking 500 cheese wheels on a merchant's head. The game engine groaned, the frame rate dropped to a crawl, and then the whole system crashed to the desktop. Success. I wrote up the report, my fingers flying across the keyboard with the tired apathy of a master. The walk home was my only respite, a time to flush the digital ghosts from my head. The city was a smear of brake lights and neon signs, a cacophony of sirens and distant arguments. It was real, messy, unpredictable, and blessedly uncoded. Or so I thought. I was waiting at a crosswalk, staring blankly at the brick apartment building across the street. The light was red. The "Don't Walk" sign glowed its angry orange. My mind was a million miles away, somewhere in a fantasy realm filled with buggy trolls. Then, it happened. For one single, heart-stopping second, the world crashed. It wasn't a thought or a daydream. It was a hard, system-level failure. The texture on the brick building across the street, the intricate, grimy, perfectly rendered pattern of mortar and clay, vanished. It didn't blur or fade. It was just gone. In its place was a swirling gray, static-filled void. It was the color of a dead channel, the raw, unrendered nothingness that exists behind every digital wall. Simultaneously, the sound of the city traffic collapsed into a single half-second audio bite that looped with the frantic, mechanical repetition of a scratched CD. Honk, shh, rum, honk, shh, rum, honk, shh, rum. A wave of profound vertigo washed over me. It was a feeling I knew intimately from my job. The nauseating sensation of falling through the map, your character model plummeting into the digital abyss beneath the world game. My stomach lurched. My brain screamed, error. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it snapped back. The bricks were there again, solid and real. The traffic sounds unfolded back into their normal, chaotic symphony. The world was stable. The system had rebooted. I stumbled back from the curb, my chest heaving. People flowed around me, oblivious. A man in a suit bumped my shoulder, muttering an apology without looking. No one else had seen it. It was my crash, my bug. I made it home in a daze, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking. I slammed the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the image of the gray static void was burned onto the back of my eyelids. It had to be a neurological issue. That was the only logical explanation. A minor seizure, an ocular migraine. I'd been staring at a screen for 10 hours a day, chugging energy drinks like water. My brain, the personal processor running my own consciousness, had simply thrown a fatal error. It was a hallucination, a glitch in my own wetware. It had to be. Because if it wasn't, if the world itself had just shown me its source code, then the bug I had just witnessed was infinitely more terrifying than any game crash I had ever logged. A week passed. I tried to bury the memory of the crosswalk crash under a mountain of work and a river of caffeine. I told myself it was a one-time brain fart, a product of stress and exhaustion. But you can't unsee a bug once you know it's there. My professional life had been dedicated to training my brain to spot inconsistencies, to find the subtle tells of a system under strain. Now, I couldn't turn it off. The bugs were everywhere. It started small, easily deniable. While riding the subway, I watched the businessman across from me turn a page of his newspaper. For a split second, his hand and the paper became transparent, and I saw the metal pole behind him perfectly. He'd clipped through the object. He didn't notice a thing, just kept on reading. I blinked, and it was gone. Just the trick of the light, I told myself, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A few days later, I was walking through a park on my lunch break. A flock of pigeons took flight from the grass in a flurry of wings. But halfway into the air, they froze. All 30 of them, locked in place, wings outstretched, suspended against the blue sky as if caught in a celestial animation loop. A dog barked and the loop broke. The pigeons continued their flights as if nothing had happened. I stood, frozen myself, a sandwich halfway to my mouth. The audio glitches were worse. They were more insidious. I'd be in a meeting, and my boss's voice would repeat the last 2 words of his sentence 3 times, perfectly, with the exact same inflection. Need this report by Friday, Friday, Friday. I'd flinch, looking around the conference table, but the other team members just nodded along, their expressions unchanged. They hadn't heard it. The audio stream was corrupted on my end only. I was becoming a QA tester for reality, and the bug list was growing at an alarming rate. The stress was eating me alive. I was barely sleeping, and when I did, my dreams were of falling through gray static voids. I had to tell someone. It's like the world's physics engine is lagging, I explained to Chloe, my voice low as we sat in a corner booth of a noisy diner. The smell of grease and burnt coffee felt grounding. Chloe was a programmer at my company, one of the few people who spoke my language. She listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. So, you're saying you saw a guy clip through a lamppost? She asked, trying to wrap her head around it. Not the whole guy, just his shoulder for a frame or two. And the pigeons. It was a classic animation stall. The system couldn't handle that many moving objects at once and just hung for a second. I was using my professional vocabulary because it was the only way I could articulate the sheer wrongness of it all without sounding completely insane. "Alex," she said gently, placing her hand over mine. "I think you need to see a doctor, a neurologist. You're describing symptoms of severe neurological distress. Your job, you spend all day looking for errors in fake worlds. It makes sense that your brain, under all this stress, might start projecting that logic onto the real world. It's a complex stress response." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe I was just sick. It was the saner, safer option. I promised her I'd make an appointment, but I knew what I was seeing wasn't in my head. It was in the world. The moment that shattered my hope for a simple medical explanation came that night. I was in my bathroom brushing my teeth. I stared at my own reflection in the mirror, my movements dull and automatic. I spat into the sink and looked up. My reflection was still brushing its teeth. It lagged a full, terrifying second behind my own movement. I stood there, frozen in place, watching the ghost me in the mirror finish the motion, spit into the sink, and then look up, its eyes meeting mine. For that single second of temporal disconnect, the world felt thin. The space between me and my reflection was distorted, like heat haze or corrupted data. And in that distortion, in the corner of the mirror, I saw it. It wasn't me. It wasn't the room. It was something else. Something that was only visible in the fractured seam of the glitch. It was a chaotic, shifting mass of impossible angles and screaming monochrome static. It had no shape, no form my brain could process, only a horrifying sense of presence. It was a geometry that hurt to look at, a being made of pure error. Then the lag corrected itself. My reflection snapped into sync with my own body. The thing in the corner of the mirror vanished. The glitch was patched. I stumbled back, hitting the wall, a choked gasp escaping my lips. A cold, profound dread, far deeper than any fear I had ever known, settled into my bones. I had been worried about the bugs, but now I knew. Something was living in the bugs. Something was looking through. Chloe's neurological explanation, once a comforting life raft, now felt like a paper-thin denial. A stressed brain doesn't create glitches with consistent rules. It doesn't render impossible, non-Euclidean geometry in the corner of your eye. My mind wasn't the system that was crashing. It was the only one running a diagnostic tool. My entire professional life, my obsessive hunt for the scenes in simulated worlds, had been the perfect, unintentional training. I wasn't going mad. The world was a simulation, and it was running out of memory. The glitches escalated from minor visual and audio bugs to major environmental failures. One morning, I looked out my apartment window at the small park across the street. Instead of the usual trees, benches, and patches of grass, the entire block was a flat, low-poly, unrendered green field. It was a placeholder asset, a developer texture that should have been replaced by the final version. It shimmered under the morning sun, a nauseatingly smooth, bright green rectangle cut out of the fabric of the city. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, for nearly a minute before the real park flickered and loaded in, piece by piece, like a slow-loading level in a video game. The fear was still there, a constant cold knot in my stomach, but a new feeling was beginning to surface alongside it, a grim, professional curiosity. This was the biggest bug I had ever encountered, and I was the only QA tester on the project. The audio glitches were changing too. The simple loops and repetitions were now filled with something else. Buried deep within the static, I began to hear a voice, It was faint, distorted, and electronic, like a corrupted WAV file playing on a dying speaker. It was fragmented, broken, but it was there. Belep Fesiva identified. It heard it hiss during a moment when the hum of my refrigerator began to loop. Error cascading. They see the seams. Do not let them see you. It wasn't a warning for me. It was a log file, a system message, and it wasn't the only one. Sometimes I'd hear a different fragment, filled with a desperate human terror. Can't patch my perception, they're at the door. Find the true noise. This, I realized, was the voice of a previous user, someone else who had seen the bugs, someone who had been found. I started calling him sysadmin73, a name that felt fittingly anonymous and technical. He was a ghost in the machine, his final, terrified warnings imprinted on the very errors that were now consuming my life. I became obsessed, trying to trigger the glitches, trying to hear more. I'd stare at complex patterns, listen to white noise, anything to push the system, to force an error. It was a dangerous game. Chloe begged me to stop, her face pale with worry. She didn't believe in the simulation, but she believed I was driving myself into a full-blown psychotic break. One night, my obsession led me too far. I was walking home, later than usual. A single streetlight on my block was flickering erratically, a stroboscopic pulse of orange light against the dark pavement. A graphical blotch, a faulty lighting asset. I stopped beneath it, staring up, trying to see the seams in the darkness between the flickers. I was concentrating, focusing my perception on the error, trying to hear the static, to catch another fragment of sysadmin73's logs. The light died completely, plunging the street into an abrupt, deep darkness. And in that darkness, it was there. It wasn't a brief glimpse in a mirror this time. It stood on the street not 20 feet from me, seemingly inspecting the faulty light. It was a towering form of pure chaos and geometry, a pillar of shifting static and silent, screaming data. Its presence was not physical, it was informational. It felt like my brain was trying to load a file that was too large, too corrupt to be processed. The very air around it seemed to pixelate and tear. I was paralyzed by a unique and horrifying sensation. The feeling of being seen by something that wasn't alive. It was the feeling of a system administrator who has just found an unauthorized process running in the background. It was the cold, impersonal scrutiny of a machine. For the first time, a part of it, a swirling vortex of static where a head might be, turned. It focused on me. I didn't feel fear in my heart or my gut. I felt it in my mind. It was a wave of pure informational terror, a query, a ping. User detected, perception anomaly, cue for debugging. I had spent my entire career finding bugs in the system. Now, the system had found a bug in me. The moment the janitor noticed me, the nature of the game changed. I was no longer a passive observer of a decaying system. I was an active error, a bug that needed to be patched. The glitches, once random and impersonal, now became targeted. They were happening to me. The debugging process had begun. It was a campaign of psychological warfare, waged through the source code of reality. I'd reach for my coffee cup in the morning, and my hand would clip straight through the ceramic handle, my fingers grasping at empty air. I'd take a step in my apartment, and the floor would momentarily lose its collision data, causing me to stumble as if the ground itself had given way. The world was being weaponized against me, its fundamental rules rewritten on the fly to cause a fatal error in my existence. One morning, I woke up to find my alarm clock was displaying not numbers, but a string of incomprehensible glitching symbols, like a font file had failed to load. The sound it emitted wasn't a beep,
but a piercing, high-frequency tone that felt like it was trying to defragment my brain. They weren't just trying to startle me. They were trying to crash my perception, to overload my senses until I blue-screened. Chloe was terrified. My frantic calls, filled with jargon about targeted collision failures and corrupted asset libraries, had finally pushed her past the point of rational medical explanation. She couldn't deny the raw, primal fear in my voice. She still wasn't sure if she believed in the simulation, but she believed that I believed, and that I was in terrible danger. She threw herself into research using her coding skills to navigate the deepest corners of the internet. She found no mainstream evidence, no global phenomenon, but she did find things on the fringes. Obscure theoretical physics papers about localized reality bubbles where the laws of physics became unstable. She found conspiracy theory forums from the late 90s filled with anonymous posts describing experiences eerily similar to mine. People talking about seeing the refresh rate of the sky or hearing the world's audio loop. Most of these accounts ended abruptly, the users simply vanishing. They had been debugged. I was living on a knife's edge, trapped in my apartment which had become a playground for the janitor's malicious code. I had to get out. I needed a safe zone. The thought came to me during a particularly nasty glitch where the text on a book I was holding began to rapidly cycle through every language I had ever seen. The system was logical. The janitors were beings of pure order, their purpose to enforce the rules. So where would a system like that have the most trouble? Where would the code be the most complex and difficult to manage? In places of immense, unpredictable, chaotic detail. I fled my apartment and ran downtown, heading for the city's oldest and most crowded market. It was a sprawling, chaotic labyrinth of stalls, a sensory explosion of shouting vendors, sizzling food, clashing music, and 1,000 different conversations happening at once. The air was thick with the smells of spices, incense, and people. The moment I stepped into the throng, I felt it. The feeling of being watched, the constant pressure on my perception lessened. It was still there at the edges, but it was muffled. It was as if the sheer amount of data in this place, the thousands of moving people, the infinite random interactions, the sensory overload, was creating too much processing strain for the janitors to target me effectively. The system was lagging here for everyone, all the time. The janitors seemed to avoid it. For the first time in days, I could breathe. I found a small corner and slumped against a wall, just watching the chaos, feeling its protective blanket wash over me. I later tested my theory in a dense, old-growth forest outside the city. The fractal complexity of the trees, the random rustling of millions of leaves, the unpredictable movements of insects and animals. It had the same effect. These places, rich with organic, unpatterned chaos, were my sanctuaries. They were the system's blind spots. But I couldn't hide in the woods forever. I was a bug living on borrowed time. I needed a permanent solution. I needed to find a way to patch myself.
My sanctuaries gave me a fighting chance. I began to move between them, the crowded market, the old forest, a packed concert hall, avoiding the clean, simple, easily rendered spaces of modern life, where the janitor's influence was strongest. In the relative quiet of these chaotic zones, I could focus. I started to actively listen for sysadmin 73's voice, turning my perception into an antenna, hoping to tune into the frequency of the glitches. I learned to recognize the precursors to an audio error, a subtle drop in ambient sound, a faint ringing in my ears. When I felt it coming, I would hold my breath and listen with every fiber of my being. Slowly, painfully, I began to piece together his story from the fragmented log files he had left behind. Was a physicist. A glitch in the sound of a rushing river whispered. Saw the quantization at a subatomic level, the pixels of the universe. It's all a simulation.
Sysadmin73 hadn't been a gamer. He had been a scientist. He'd stumbled upon the truth not through a faulty texture on a brick wall, but through the granular mathematical reality of the universe itself. He had seen the code. Another fragment, caught in the looping chorus of a pop song from a street vendor's radio, filled in more of the story. Called them janitors. They don't think. They maintain. They prune anything that threatens system stability. Awareness is the primary threat, a virus of consciousness. The janitors weren't evil. They were cosmic maintenance programs, and consciousness that became aware of the simulation was a corrupting influence, a virus that had to be deleted. They had hunted him, just as they were now hunting me. His final logs were a testament to his desperate, terrified last days. Tried to isolate myself, build a Faraday cage for reality, but they get through the code, they change the rules. Then came the crucial piece of the puzzle, the one that made my blood run cold and my heart fill with a sliver of desperate hope. I was in the market, the cacophony at its peak, when a nearby glitch caused the butcher's shouting to distort into a long electronic drone. In that drone, Sysadmin73's voice was clearer than I had ever heard it before. The patch, not in the world, in the self. They are beings of logic, order, pattern. They read our consciousness like a user ID file. To them, we are predictable data streams. But the human mind, it has a capacity for true, unpatterned, conceptual chaos. It is the one thing in the system that can generate pure noise. If you could reinitialize your own perception, flood your signature with that noise, you could become illegible to them. You could corrupt your own user file, hide your ID from the system. It was a theoretical, desperate gambit, a way to fight back, not by attacking, but by becoming incomprehensible. His final log entry, the one I'd heard before, now made perfect, terrifying sense. It was his last warning, his last gift. The glitch began to fade, the butcher's voice returning to normal. But just before it did, I heard Sysadmin73's final terrified words, imprinted on the static like a fossil in stone. It's too late for me. They're at the door. Find the noise. Find the true noise. The message ended. I stood in the middle of the chaotic market, the world swirling around me. I had the theory. I had the warning. But I was left with a single, cryptic, life-or-death question. Sysadmin73, the physicist, had died before he could find the answer. What was the true noise? And where in God's name could I find it? The hunt for the true noise became an obsession. I was a man on the run from the universe's sysadmins, and my only hope was a cryptic clue left by a dead man. I thought it had to be an external source. I sought out avant-garde noise music concerts, chaotic modern art installations, even the raw data streams of stock market tickers, hoping to find a source of pure, unpatterned chaos to reinitialize my perception. But nothing worked. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, never left. The janitors were always there, waiting just outside the bubble of chaos I used as a shield. And they were getting closer. They were learning. The safe zones were becoming less effective. I'd see a flicker of impossible geometry in the middle of the crowded market. I'd hear a looped audio fragment even in the depths of the forest. They were allocating more processing power to my case, upgrading their search parameters. My time was running out. I was forced back to my apartment, the one place I knew was a death trap. I'd been on the run for days, and I was exhausted. I barricaded the door, a futile gesture against beings who could simply delete the wall. The glitches started immediately, and they were worse than ever. My apartment began to be a living nightmare of broken physics and missing textures. The floor would flicker, revealing the gray void beneath for seconds at a time. The air itself began to tear and pixelate, the light from my windows bending at impossible angles. The janitors were no longer just observing. They were actively trying to manifest, their very presence corrupting the local code of my living space. I could feel their immense, silent weight pressing in from all sides. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the soul, that I only had hours, maybe minutes, before my own code was completely and irrevocably deleted. I retreated to the bathroom, the smallest, most stable room in the apartment. The glitches were less severe in here, the space too simple to offer many vectors for attack. I locked the door and slumped to the floor, my back against the cool porcelain of the bathtub. This was it, the end of the line. I had failed. Sysadmin 73 had failed. There was no escape. I stared at myself in the mirror, a haggard, terrified man with wild eyes and a gaunt face. Defeated. And then I saw it. My reflection began to glitch. My right eye flickered for a single frame. The line of my jaw became jagged, pixelated. I was staring at the glitch, at the error in my own image, and then the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, a blinding, terrifying epiphany. Sysadmin 73 was a physicist. He looked for answers in the external world, in the mathematics of the universe. That was his mistake. He was looking for a source of chaos to find. I was a QA tester. I understood users. I understood the interface between the system and the thing using it. What is the one source of true, unpredictable, unpatterned chaos in a world of rigid code and predictable patterns? What is the ultimate random number generator? Human consciousness. My own mind. The true noise wasn't something to find out there. It was something to become. The patch wasn't an external program you could run. It was an internal state of being. You couldn't fight the janitors. You couldn't hide from them. You had to make yourself unreadable to them. You had to corrupt your own data streams so profoundly that their system would reject it as garbage. A plan, insane and desperate, formed in my mind. I looked at my glitching reflection, a grim smile spreading across my face. The janitors wanted to debug me. Fine, I was about to give them a fatal system error they would never forget. The bathroom door began to dissolve. It didn't break or splinter. It simply de-rendered, its texture flickering away to reveal the swirling, static gray void behind it. The janitors were breaking through. The final debugging was at hand. Through the expanding hole, I could see their vast, horrifying forms moving within the chaos. Colossal engines of pure logic, their impossible shapes an affront to sanity. The informational pressure was immense, a silent scream that threatened to tear my consciousness apart. I was cornered. This was my final stand. There was no weapon to wield, no shield to raise. The battleground was my own mind. I pushed myself away from the tub and sat cross-legged in the middle of the small room, the tiles beneath me already starting to lose their collision data. I closed my eyes. The oral assault began, the sound of the world outside my bathroom collapsing into a singular, deafening roar of static. Stop trying to make sense of things, I told myself. Stop trying to find patterns. That's their language. You have to speak in gibberish. I took a deep breath and deliberately, forcefully let go of the anchor of reason. I plunged into the chaotic, messy, unpredictable sea of my own humanity. I forced my mind to become an engine of pure, unpatterned thought. I flooded my consciousness with everything at once, with no order, no logic. I summoned the taste of cinnamon toast from my childhood and overlaid it with the smell of burning circuits from a server I once fried. I pictured my first kiss while simultaneously feeling the searing pain of a broken arm from when I was 12. I recited nonsensical poetry. The lavender clock screams Tuesday's silent thunder. while hearing the lyrics to 100 different songs clashing in my head. The soaring chorus of a power ballad, the frantic beat of a drum and bass track, the gentle melody of a lullaby my mother used to sing. They all played at once, a cacophony of memory and emotion. I embraced pure contradictory irrationality. I loved and hated the color blue at the exact same instant. I felt soaring hope for a future I knew was impossible, and crushing despair for a past that never happened. I laughed at the memory of a funeral and wept at the punchline of a stupid joke. I was a living contradiction, a paradox wrapped in flesh. To the janitors, beings of pure logic and order, my consciousness must have been an abomination. They could parse data streams, analyze patterns, and predict logical outcomes. They could not process this. My mind, in its state of deliberate chaos, had become a kernel panic, a fatal system error that could not be computed. Through my closed eyelids, I could perceive their presence faltering. The intense, focused pressure on my mind was breaking. The direct observational link they had on me was being severed by the sheer, overwhelming noise of my soul. I felt them recoil. I saw their forms, the brief after images burned into my vision, glitching violently, their perfect, impossible geometry fracturing and breaking apart. They were not destroyed. You can't destroy a fundamental process. But they could no longer parse my data. In effect, I had turned my user file into a zip bomb. By trying to read me, they were crashing themselves. The pressure vanished completely. The roaring static in my ears subsided, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. I had done it. I had become the bug they couldn't fix. I sat in the silence for a long time, the echoes of my mental chaos slowly fading. The exhaustion was bone deep, a psychic weariness that left me feeling hollowed out, but impossibly alive. The feeling of being watched, the constant oppressive weight of the janitor's scrutiny that had been my companion for weeks, was gone. I was alone in my own head for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Slowly, I opened my eyes. My bathroom was solid. The door was whole. The tiles were firm beneath me. The light was steady. My apartment had snapped back to a stable, solid reality. I was back in the stable build. But something was different. The world looked richer. The colors seemed deeper. The textures more detailed. The air itself had a weight and complexity I'd never noticed before. It was less predictable, more organic. It was as if by rebooting my own perception, I had unlocked a higher graphics setting for reality itself. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I dialed Chloe. The call went through instantly, the connection perfectly clear, with no static, no loops, no hidden whispers. Alex? Her voice was fraught with sleepless anxiety. Oh my God, are you okay? I was about to call the police. I'm okay, Chloe, I said, my own voice hoarse. It's over. I'm okay. I couldn't explain what I'd done over the phone, but she could hear the change in me. The frantic, hunted edge was gone. The next day, I quit my job. I walked into the office, submitted my resignation, and didn't look back. I could no longer stand the sterile logic of code, the endless, cynical search for errors in contained, predictable systems. I had seen the biggest bug in the universe and had survived by becoming a bigger one. My life changed. I embraced the messiness I had once scorned. I embraced randomness, art, music, travel. I lived in the true noise of the world, finding a strange comfort in its unpredictable, chaotic beauty. I became a man who actively sought out the complex, the messy, the gloriously irrational parts of life. I was finally living outside the confines of the map. Years passed. The memory of the janitors faded into a kind of surreal, traumatic dream. I was in a crowded, chaotic market in a foreign country, the air thick with the scent of spices and the sound of a language I didn't understand. I felt truly happy, truly alive. I took out my phone to capture the moment, snapping a picture of the vibrant, swirling crowd. I glanced down at the screen to look at the photo. For a single frozen frame, the image on the screen showed the market, but with a single, massive, gray, untextured hole in the middle of the crowd. A familiar, heart-stopping void of pure, unrendered nothingness. My blood ran cold. I looked up. The real world was fine. The crowd was whole, the space filled with people laughing and talking. I looked back down at the phone. The picture was normal now, a perfect, colorful snapshot of the market. With a trembling finger, I deleted the photo. A cold shiver ran down my spine, a chilling reminder of the truth. I had patched my own perception, but the world was still running on old code. And there are still bugs in the system. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.